Willow. Chapter 12. Thomas Sinclair, Man of Mystery. When I was 10 and I was still in grade school, or primary school as we call it in Quebec, I had to do something I didn't want to do. Now, let's be honest. I was a 10-year-old artsy, rebellious child, so there was quite the laundry list of things I did not want to do. I didn't want to do homework, and I could have done without getting up early for school. I did not care for summer camp, and it was a toss-up whether I was going to be excited by field trips or pretend I had the flu to avoid going. Those are all the typical things a kid in primary school might struggle with doing. During the fall of that particular year, however, I ran into the kind of problem that might have been a little ethically complicated for that age. There was this kid, Kevin Reed. He's what science today has identified as a raging little turd, but back then I think we simply called him a stupid head. Not to his face, though, because Kevin had two outstanding characteristics: unbridled aggression and an early growth spurt. It doesn't take much to understand why that's not a great combination. It'll come as no surprise that Kevin and I did not spend a lot of time in the same social circles. While I was always looking for new and creative ways to get out of playing dodgeball, Kevin was practicing tossing the ball in as lethal a way as he could. But Kevin never did anything to me. I was a quiet, nerdy kid, but not one with any specially outrageous physical characteristics. No thick glasses, and years before I had to get braces. I wore the most middle-of-the-road clothes and got grades so average at the time that my report card could have been used to calibrate classes. He did go after my friend Melissa, though, and that could not go unpunished. So I did what a quiet, nerdy, pig-headed girl of 10 does when her friend gets picked on by the school bully. I got revenge. I can't remember exactly what it was. I think I got Eric to buy me some stink bombs and I put them in his locker. Or maybe I just mixed up some dog poop and garbage water and poured the cocktail into his school bag. I know it had something to do with noxious smells, because the note sent home to my mom made a point that the janitor couldn't get rid of it. I got detention and I got grounded, and I was fine with all of that. My buddy was avenged, and now Kevin had a new threat to contend with. I stuck up for the little guy, or girl. No one threw me a parade, and I don't think any of the other kids truly appreciated my heroic effort, but I knew that I'd been the David to that particular Goliath. That is, until the principal, in cahoots with my parents, came up with a particularly vile new punishment. They told me that Kevin, while mean and aggressive, was having a really hard time at home. In their adult wisdom, they decided that what would be best is if I were to apologize to Kevin, to show him that his school friends valued him. Not only was I made to go through with that particular humiliation, but my dad very pointedly told me to be sincere, and that if I wasn't, he'd know. I was 10. Of course I believed my father could see through me if I lied. So I spent the whole weekend forcing myself, tricking myself, and brainwashing myself into feeling sorry for Kevin Reed. I tried to picture him as a wounded cat that bit and clawed out of fear rather than anger. Aside from bowing to the whims of Chef Gagnon, that apology must have been the single worst thing I was forced to do in my student career. And I was once tricked into doing a cheerleader tryout. Tonight, standing in front of my oven, waiting for a lemon rosemary loaf to finish baking, I feel like I'm apologizing to Kevin Reed all over again. Except this time, instead of my father being the judge of my sincerity, it feels like 6 generations of Dufour witches are watching from beyond the grave. The hair-thin line that separates earnest contrition from going through the motions is measured by results, not my acting abilities. I couldn't go into this recipe riding on my initial motivation. Fear of Olivia's judgment and the shame that I might not be growing into the witch I thought would have yielded unsavory results. Just like the Pfeffernussen that drove Thomas Sinclair to new heights of paranoia, If I infuse this loaf with the wrong intent, the results could be unpredictable, dangerous even. Somehow, I had to feel more than just mild regret for my actions. It sounds like an easy enough task, doesn't it? Looking at the nick in my countertop and how, for whatever reason, I can't seem to ever get the last droplets of blood from within its depth. No matter if I scrub it with a toothbrush or pick at it with a needle, the little maroon dot under the varnish stubbornly remains. That should put into perspective how badly Thomas did injure himself. But I didn't know that what I was baking would have that effect. I just wanted to vent my frustration in what should have been a completely harmless way, and that's the problem. Every time I tried to find remorse in myself, it was like digging for that last fleck of dried blood. Whatever I did, I came up empty-handed. I wanted to call Gulliver and ask him to tell me why Thomas Sinclair, the obnoxious loudmouth, was worth my regret. But I knew Gulliver would have come up short on this account. He's a fan of Thomas, not a friend. He likes Sinclair the way I like Anthony Bourdain, not because of a deep understanding of the man, but because his oeuvre speaks to me. The only thing that ever spoke to me about Sinclair is, well, Sinclair. Endlessly. I figured that maybe that was the problem. What I needed was to learn of the man, not through the character he projects here in Aquilo, not through the eyes of one of his most ardent fans, but through the closest thing to his soul. I needed to look at his art, to see through it and notice the man beyond. The Aquilo should have been closed, its lights turned off and its floor swept. Instead, long after midnight and long after the last customer left, I still sat, alone at the table I had shared with Olivia. My earphones tucked into my ears and my phone sitting on my lap. 3 episodes of his podcast I listened to, over and over again. Stranger Limits is an interesting beast. It's not good. Low production and almost no structure do little to couch the grating voice of Sinclair. His topics have more variety than I anticipated, but they're all on the same level of crazy. From politics to biology, everything he talks about takes a turn for the absurd. First, because of the inherent ridiculous nature of what he reports on, but then through Sinclair's own insane lens. After the first listen through, I felt like I wasted my time. But I also felt like I missed something important. I went back and listened again, and again. Each time, there was another layer of Thomas revealed to me. I'll never be a fan of Stranger Limits. I don't like the subject matter and topics. I don't like listening to Thomas's voice. But once I peeled back the content of his podcast, paying more attention to his intent, listening to him talk about his cat and his planned trip to Aquilo, I heard something else. Below the paranoia, there's a strange sense of optimism in how Thomas sees the world. Curiosity unimpeded by scientific truth, for sure, but also unhindered by malice. Thomas Sinclair believes in Bigfoot despite all evidence to the contrary, but only because to him, it's a much more beautiful world for having the cryptid in it. He believes in UFOs because they open the door to something incredible that's lacking in his and most people's lives. Thomas Sinclair didn't come to Aquilo for a story so he can sell more mattress ads on his show. He came to Aquilo because he was looking for something extraordinary. That's why he needed to be there when I delivered that cake to Julia Remington. It's why he couldn't resist going in when invited. It's why his grubby hands found their way to the cake box when they shouldn't have. Whatever else is going on in Thomas Sinclair's life, he has a need and a hunger for the incredible and a drive to share that with others. And if I can convince myself that these were his intentions, maybe I still can't feel regret or remorse, but I can earnestly want him to get better. I can sincerely wish his paranoia away. I open the oven and inhale the citrusy smell of the lemon rosemary loaf. I have to let it cool before drizzling on the glaze. Then I'll put it in a box, close it with a ribbon, and as early as possible bring it to the hospital. I can tell from the smell and the warmth that this is going to work. There's a piece of rice paper on which I drew a glyph dissolved into the batter. All of my intentions and all of my desire for him to make a full recovery, not just for his hand, but of his senses, have been infused. My apology to Kevin Reed worked because of good method acting on my part for a 10-year-old. This is going to work because I want it to, for the right reasons. Little more than a year in, and I already know the small Aquilo Memorial Hospital almost like the back of my hand. What a weird name when you think about it. Usually, the word memorial is tagged to an old building in a way to honor whoever the establishment is named after. Here, in Aquilo, the hospital seems to honor the city itself. Or maybe it honors the Aquilo tree, which would be no less strange. Whatever reason they have for giving it that name, I've been here in almost every capacity. I've been a patient and I've been a visitor. I've even been a supplier, hired to make a cake for the birthday of the director. All I need is to perform surgery, and I'll have done everything I could possibly imagine there. When I walk into the Aquilo Memorial Hospital, people greet me with warmth, but also a little bit of apprehension. I'm carrying a box with the cafe's logo, and that's exciting. Did someone order a cake for the break room? Is it someone's birthday? Will there be leftovers that they can get a taste of? I walk to the front desk, and Aline, the orderly on duty, greets me with an expectant smile. Her eyebrows arc and her eyes flirt with the cellophane window on the box. Perhaps a glimpse will grant a clue as to what sweet treat I'm bringing in for who. But my question answers her curiosity. "Hi, Aline," I say with a friendly wave. "Can you tell me what room I can find Thomas Sinclair in?" Immediately, I know that wasn't the thing to ask. The way Aline recoils, like she spotted a nasty centipede crawling in between her papers, I might as well have asked where I could get transplant organs for a recipe. She shakes her head, preparing me for the bad news. Is he gone? Is he in a coma? The scenarios follow one another in my brain like a chain of paranoia, each link bigger, thicker, and heavier than the last. At the end is an anchor dragging me to a grinding halt. Was it all for nothing? Am I too late to help undo what I've done? All this soul-searching, all this introspection to find and accept guilt and responsibility, are they wasted? Am I going to have to leave this box in the break room after all? "He's on the second floor," Aline says, relieving my worst fears. "Room 206, but I very much doubt he'll eat anything you bring in." Well, that was dumb. It's like trying to douse a grease fire with oil. If I walk into Thomas Sinclair's room, asking him to eat more of my food, the same food he's been accusing of having poisoned him, it'll only make matters worse. Not to mention, maybe someone will start to take his accusations seriously. And while I have nothing to fear from a health inspection, I really can't be bothered right now. A good analogy would be that I've hidden anti-allergy medication in a thick batch of peanut butter, and, of course, the patient is allergic to peanut butter. Because I'm a genius baker, but I still have some work to do when it comes to heists and capers. Asking Aline for her help by explaining how this is a magic cake that will help Thomas get over his paranoia is, of course, out of the question. Where does that leave me? I could go up there and force-feed him the loaf. With any luck, they've got him strapped to his bed. What would I need to do? Stuff some pieces in his mouth and pinch his nose till he swallows? Maybe if I wait next to his room until they bring his food, I could sneak a few pieces of my loaf onto his tray. He'd eat it without being the wiser. Do I sneak through the air vents and slowly lower pieces down into his mouth while he sleeps? "You want me to bring it into him without saying who it's from?" Aline offers. I'm assuming it isn't poisoned, right? I try not to poison clients who spend upwards of $20 on cookies and orange juice every day. Without even asking me, Aline snatches the box from the counter to put down on her desk. Before I can say a simple, hey, she slips the ribbon and opens the lid. Sharp, citrusy smells beat back the stink of disinfectant and medicine. Fragrant aromas of rosemary are more difficult to spot, but nonetheless inevitable to the attentive nose. The beauty isn't in the lemon and herb, though, but in the perfect balance between the two, all enhanced by a velvety couching of smooth, sugary drizzle. If the nose is to be believed, taste buds would rejoice at the touch of this simple dessert. On second thought, maybe I should have just brought it to Thomas myself. Even if it were poisoned, I know I'd still take my chance just for a taste of this masterpiece. Man, when I'm baking an apology, I really knock it out of the park, don't I? Oh, Aline says, her nose twitching through the air like a hamster's. Oh, wow. Do you think I could ask for a bit of payment if I get this to him? You want a piece? Of course she wants a piece. Hell, I made it. I smelled the loaf coming out of the oven, still glistening from the melted butter just seeping to the top a little. I let the damn thing permeate my small apartment for an hour before it was cool enough to coat with drizzle. When I get home later today, it's that very smell that will greet me at the door. A warm, teasing embrace of something delicious that I made for someone I don't even like and then left behind. All of that, and I want a piece. The only thing I tasted was a touch of batter before being poured into a bread pan and slid into the oven. That's why I'm not asking if she wants a piece. I'm telling her she does. Because there's no question, just the plain truth. Get him to eat a slice and you can have a piece for yourself. Just don't tell him I made it until he's feeling better. I feel bad for the guy, but I don't want him freaking out any more than he already is. Actually, she says, I was going to ask that you make me one for the weekend, but... Aline takes another whiff of the sweet lemon miracle. I think I'll take you up on this version of the offer. This is what's wonderful about food. Even in its most mundane and everyday form, it's not just sustenance. It's community and quiet dialogue. It's a key. Make something good enough and everyone is willing to take a moment and say, let's hear them out. They brought brownies. About an hour after my exchange at the reception desk, I'm knocking on the door to 206. As I slip my face through the crack to look inside before being welcomed in, I see Thomas Sinclair. And he sees me. He's not in bed, but rather sitting on a chair, wearing a terry cloth bathrobe and typing along on his laptop. One-handed, of course. There's no panicked screaming at my sight, no crazed accusations, just a sheepish smile and a wave of his bandaged hand for me to come in. On the table next to him, there's a tray of food and what I recognize as the crumbs of my perfect lemon rosemary loaf and a half-empty glass of orange juice. Gotta have his vitamins. Come in, come in. The way he beckons is just as boisterous as he's always been. Had I been more ambitious and perhaps more villainous, maybe I could have baked something in the loaf to quell that particular trait of him. But I feel that this is the path Olivia was trying to warn me away from. In fact, that I even had the thought. I recognize that it's a path I might have to be wary of for a while still. I wonder if it's a direction any of the previous Dufour witches went down. Thinking of the dog-eared pages with angry scrawling in the cookbook, I have a hunch my suspicions aren't unfounded. I walk in, eyes fixated on his hand. It's a thick bandage, but clean and white as snow. Thomas winces as he wiggles his finger. Didn't hit a nerve or even a tendon, he explains with pride. But went right through all the muscle and skin, with a butter knife. Honestly, I didn't think I had it in me. Actually, I guess the problem is that I believed I did have it in me and I was trying to get it out. Doctors still don't know what happened. There's no history of psychotic breaks or schizophrenic episodes in my family. I don't take any drugs, not since reading about MK Ultra. I don't mind getting high and groovy, but not if I end up as some government sleeper agent. No, sir. Hell, just this morning, I still thought you were out to get me and that there were nanoparticles in my blood mind-controlling me through microwave. I did it. Words slip out of my mouth like a sneeze, involuntary and uncontrollable. Someone else might have been squeezing my lungs with one hand while manipulating my vocal cords with the other, using me like a grotesque truth bagpipe. It isn't mind control or glamour forcing my confession, however. It's guilt. I was pissed at you for what you did to the widow Remington, so I enchanted some cookies to make you paranoid. Well, more paranoid. I didn't mean to, though. The enchantment just slipped into the recipe. I'm really sorry about it, and about your hand. Thomas looks as confused as a fish at an amusement park. Bug-eyed and his mouth agape, it's as if his brain short-circuited at the information. The pathways are simply not there for him to process what I've just said. With a bit of luck, this might be my opportunity to walk back this truth overdose. Would he believe me if I said I was kidding? Did he even properly hear me spout off all my nonsense? Of course not. Why is luck never on the menu in these situations? The cognitive crash is short-lived, and Thomas Sinclair reboots too swiftly, having lost no information in the process. His cavernous mouth finally closes, and he slowly blinks moisture back into his eyes. Careful not to drop anything, he closes his notepad and sets his pen aside. I think there's a bit of a tremor in his hands as he does so, though that might be my imagination, or the pain from his wound. "Yes," he says, whispering with quiet excitement. "I was hoping for something like this." In the end, my impromptu confession to Thomas Sinclair changed nothing. At least, it didn't change anything immediate. Once his paranoid episode was cured by my lemon rosemary loaf, an accomplishment for which I'm proud, but not proud enough to openly admit, there was a little reason for him to be kept at the hospital. So, I guess you're going to have something special to talk about on your podcast now, aren't you? I can't hide the apprehension in my voice. Now that I've listened to Stranger Limits, I have a better understanding of what kind of show it is. Normally, I wouldn't be too worried. It's utter nonsense, with most of the entertainment coming from just how over-the-top Thomas gets when talking about all the strange things that fascinate him. He's the show, not his subjects. But reading the comments and reviews of Stranger Limits does paint a picture of his audience. It's not a homogeneous mix. Most are like Thomas. They want to believe, but while they get a kick out of the possibility of Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster, they're still waiting for undeniable proof. But there is a subset that are true believers. They pop up here and there. Some report on their own sightings and are rather inoffensive. There's a chupacabra or UFO-shaped mystery in their lives, and they connect with the man who's made it his job to talk about it on the internet. Who am I to ridicule these people? However, once you remove those who are there for the spectacle and those who believe with earnest sincerity, there's the bottom scrapings of the barrel. They're the fans who believe because they're looking for a place to belong. They sneak into these beliefs like insects crawl between cracks and rotting floorboards. It's less about finding hidden truth and more about going where light can't reach them. A kind of toxic security. These people latch onto Thomas's words with desperate fanaticism. Of everything I've seen of Stranger Limits, they're the only aspect that genuinely scares me. They're the ones I don't want to see showing up in Aquilo, looking for proof, ready to turn this town upside down for a glimpse of a ghost or a whiff of a demon. They would do to Aquilo on purpose what Thomas Sinclair did to the widow Remington by accident. That's why, as we walk out of the hospital, our boots crushing another fresh layer of sparkling snow, I wish I could take back my confession. "Are you kidding?" Thomas says, as excited as if he were running after an ice cream truck. "A ghost? Witches? Magic lights in the woods? I was hoping I'd maybe find a local legend about a Yeti or something, but this?" He spins around like an awkward ballerina, arms in the air, his bandaged hand catching the light of the vanishing sun. "This town is just full of mysteries, isn't it?" I shake my head and avert my eyes. My hands bury themselves in my pockets, and I look to the ground, trying to make myself as invisible as possible to compensate for Thomas. I have a month of content just from what I've been through yesterday. I'd have stabbed my hand myself if I'd known about any of this. Do you have a coven? What else is there in Aquilo? Demons? Vampires? There are no vampires in Aquilo. The answer comes out automatically, as if I were trained for it. I don't know how important finding vampires on the border between Canada and the U.S. is, but Thomas gets very quiet after my answer. He looks around again, taking in anew the buildings and businesses that line Rue Principale. The exuberance is gone, and I can see the shrewd businessman capable of single-handedly building a podcast career for the first time. I think that maybe the enormity of what's been revealed to him, the weight of each discovery finally pressing on him, might be registering for Thomas. But that's not quite it. So, he says with a sobriety I didn't think possible, how do you want to do this? How do I want to do what? I'm going to tell your story, or this story. How do you want me to tell it? I don't want you to tell it at all. He looks at his bandaged hand again, turning to look at all angles. He wiggles the fingers that stick out from the white gauze. About 2 years ago, I went up to Aurelia in Ontario. First time I was in Canada. Had a great time, even though I was a bit annoyed at how much a passport costs. There was this woman, let's call her Cassandra, whose brother posted on Reddit she'd seen a UFO. She denied it, didn't want to be in the pages of some tabloid or even make local news. She was terrified of being the local UFO nut. And I get that. I know it doesn't look like it, but I get it. I choose the UFO nut life. When I get behind the microphone and record an episode of Stranger Limits, I know what people hear and I'm fine with it. It's the price I pay for the freedom to ask the questions I ask and seek the truths I seek. Thomas takes a deep breath. He's verbose and long-winded. I can sense the background radiation of his manic energy burning just under the surface, but something about this story keeps him level. I badgered her and pestered her, brought her to the brink of calling the cops. I know what you're thinking. Isn't this a bit of an overreaction? I wasn't thinking that at all, but I let him continue. Anyways, on my last night there, I got desperate. I visited her backyard. Small farmhouse with a few broken down cars in the back. Looked like a junkyard, but I could see where an amateur mechanic would make a playground of it. I found something there. A piece of metal, lighter than styrofoam, hard as steel. At some angles it would fold and bend, yet if I let it rest for a moment, it'd go back to its original shape. There's no way that it wasn't some weird metamaterial. Very much like what Jesse Marcel found in Roswell in 1947. I'm not saying it was a piece of UFO. Probably a piece of government experimental craft. Maybe it was reverse engineered from a UFO or transdimensional. He cuts himself off, as if noticing his own voice for the first time. After a heavy sigh, he seems ready to give up on his story. I'm not sure if he's afraid he's boring me or managed to finally bore himself. Go on, I say. I don't care about the details of his tale, but I want to know the point. Right, he continues. Cassandra caught me red-handed. If I'd been somewhere in New Mexico or Texas, she'd have blown my head off, guaranteed. That's what I like about Canadians. They'll train a rifle on you, but they'll have a conversation before shooting. She confessed. She told me about the UFO. The piece she saw fall from the sky, the very same I was holding. But she begged me not to tell the story. Not to turn Aurelia into the next Roswell. Another pause. This time he seems to be thinking, trying hard to remember some detail. Episode 408, he says. One of my most downloaded. I'd tell you to go listen, but I'm having server issues. Anyways, I tell the story exactly how it happened. Except for some details that I worked out right there at gunpoint with Cassandra. Except nothing I just told you happened in Aurelia. And as I said, the woman wasn't named Cassandra. We get to the door of the Aquilo Cafe, and I put my hand on the handle. I can see from the corner of my eye that my little family is there, watching and waiting. Olivia is in her casual clothes, and Stefan is watching like he's expecting to lose his job. Even Gulliver is hanging out with a pile of pastries in front of him. But I keep the door closed. Aren't you afraid your audience will call you out for lying or hiding details?
Nah.
Thomas shakes his head.
My listeners are there for the mysteries, the hidden truths. If what I talk about can have all the details dug up from old newspaper clippings, what's the point?
I pull the door open by an inch and stop again. So we're just going to come up with a lie? Thomas Sinclair shakes his head and smiles. He puts his own hand on the door handle of the Aquilo, his good one.
I'm a tour guide to the unusual. There's a secret beach where I take my listeners so they can have experiences like nothing they'd find anywhere else. I just make a habit of blindfolding them first so they don't find their way back on their own later and spoil the beach.
I feel a wave of reassurance, and I must have smiled in a telling way because Olivia gives me a satisfying wink from behind her mug. We're about to step into the cafe when something about Thomas occurs to me. I grab his wrist just above his wounded hand and stop him. Wait, I ask in a hushed tone. What else have you seen on this beach? But I don't get an answer. Instead, he pulls his arm away and walks over to the counter exclaiming,
Ghost Moose!
Aquilo is written by J.F. Dubow and narrated and produced by me, Amy Frost. If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast platform. Want to support the show? Buy us a coffee. Go to ko-fi.com/Aquilo to donate. Aquilo has a Patreon. Visit patreon.com/Aquilo for details. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram under the username Aquilo.